Hello, guys. So, some of you have asked me about membrane fluidity. So, to explain this properly, I'm going to be answering this question. So, but before that, let's just recall a bit about membranes. So, the cell lipid membrane is quite movable, meaning that it moves around. The phospholipids move around along with the proteins that are inserted into the membrane. And this is very crucial because it really helps actually, the cells to move, sorry, the proteins in the cell membrane to move around to go to different locations. That's a very crucial thing for it. But also, it's very important for the membrane to move around to do a lot of its process to actually work. And a lot of it has a certain functions, and that allows it to move. So one thing that can really affect its movement is temperature, because if you increase temperature, you're giving energy to the phospholipids to move around a lot. And if you reduce the temperature, so you put it in cold, you're making the phospholipids actually lose a lot of the energy and they're not able to move. So we need to sometimes combat that. I'm here going to explain to you how you can do it so with this question. So the question goes like, mammals like caribou that live in the Arctic often use different lipid types in their legs. Legs are more susceptible to heat loss than internal organs, which are closer to the body core and stay warmer. Which adaptations would you expect for lipids in caribou legs? First one, the lipids would be more saturated. That's false. Because the lipids in the cell, actually in the cell membrane, is exposed to a lot of coldness, they're in generally going to be basically less fluidy. So what we want to do is increase the properties of the phospholipids to make them more fluidy. So if we actually make them more saturated, saturation actually decreases fluidity. So to combat that, what the deer should do, or the caribou in this case, sorry, should actually desaturate, not saturate, because if you desaturate the cell membrane, it's going to become more fluidy, and that's going to help it actually, be in the cold. Because if it's more fluidy, it can still move better than if it was saturated. So that's why this is false. It has to be unsaturated. Second, the lipid of the fatty acids should be shorter. That's true because if the cell membrane, if the basically the fatty acids are very long, this makes the whole cell membrane very bulky, which are basically very bulky when it comes to the fatty acids. And these then kind of what's going to happen? The fatty acids are going to come together a lot, and that's going to prevent them actually from moving. Because if they get together a lot, they're going to get in themselves into knots and very agglutinate with each other. So basically bind to each other a lot, and that's going to stop them from binding. So that's why it should be shorter. If they're shorter, they're able to move better. So that's why this is true. Second, the membrane will contain more cholesterol. So what cholesterol does here, it makes the cell membrane more um, bulkier, but it actually prevents fatty acids from touching each other. So they're not able to kind of, let's say, bind to each other and kind of glutinate or kind of, let's say, create this ball. Because if they start getting too close with each other, they're really going to start binding to each other and they're not going to move. So cholesterol prevents that. So that's why having more cholesterol, it actually helps a lot or much more in making the membranes more movable. That's how this is it. So can you change membranes to become more fluidy? Changing temperature is one of them. So if you increase temperature, you make them more actually movable, and if you actually make them colder, you make them less movable. So that's one way. And of course, as like for example, the caribou, where the legs are exposed to cold, it has to combat that. How to combat it is by changing the composition of the membrane. So if it's actually you want them to move more, they have to be more desaturated. They have to be more shorter and basically have more cholesterol. And sorry that I'm confused, not desaturated, unsaturated. So those are how you can change the whole membrane fluidity.